A boy rejected by his family finds love in unexpected hands. Years later, fate teaches them a powerful lesson that will change their souls forever. Get ready to be amazed by this story, but before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and attract 10 years of good luck. The pristine halls of St. Mary's Hospital in Boston echoed with the cries of a newborn baby boy. It was a crisp autumn morning, and the air was thick with anticipation. In a private room at the end of the maternity ward, Elizabeth Blackwell clutched her husband's hand, her face a mix of exhaustion and worry. "Richard, darling, what's taking so long? Why haven't they brought our baby?" Elizabeth's voice quivered, her eyes fixed on the closed door. Richard Blackwell, a titan of industry known for his steely resolve, found himself uncharacteristically nervous. He paced the room, his expensive Italian loafers clicking against the polished floor. "I'm sure everything's fine, Liz. These things take time." But deep down, he felt an inexplicable unease. The nurses had whisked the baby away immediately after birth, muttering something about standard procedures. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, the couple's anxiety grew. A gentle knock on the door startled them both. Dr. Sarah Chen, the attending physician, entered the room, her face unreadable. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell," she began, her voice soft but steady, "your son is healthy and strong." Elizabeth let out a sigh of relief, but Richard noticed the doctor's hesitation. "But," he prompted, bracing himself. Dr. Chen took a deep breath. "Your son shows characteristics consistent with Down syndrome. We'll need to run some tests to confirm, but Down syndrome?" Richard interrupted, his voice sharp. "There must be some mistake. We had all the prenatal tests done. They were all clear." Elizabeth's grip on Richard's hand tightened. "What does this mean, doctor? Will our baby be okay?" Dr. Chen approached the bed, her demeanor compassionate. Down syndrome is a chromosomal condition that causes developmental delays and some physical characteristics. But many individuals with Down syndrome lead fulfilling, happy lives with proper care and support. Richard's mind raced. As CEO of Blackwell Enterprises, he had carefully cultivated an image of perfection, in business and in his personal life. A child with special needs didn't fit into that picture. He could already imagine the whispers at board meetings, the pitying looks at charity galas. "Can we see him?" Elizabeth's quiet request cut through Richard's spiraling thoughts. Moments later, a nurse entered, cradling a small bundle. As she placed the baby in Elizabeth's arms, both parents gasped. The infant's almond-shaped eyes, slightly flattened facial features, and tiny upturned nose were unmistakable signs of Down syndrome. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears as she traced her finger along the baby's soft cheek. "He's beautiful," she whispered, a mix of love and fear in her voice. Richard, however, felt a coldness seep into his chest. This wasn't the heir he had envisioned for his empire. How could a child with intellectual disabilities possibly take over Blackwell Enterprises one day? As Elizabeth cooed at their newborn, Richard stepped back, his mind already formulating a plan. He couldn't let this tarnish everything he had worked so hard to build. There had to be a way out. "Liz," he said, his voice low and controlled, "we need to talk about what's best for our family, and for the baby." Elizabeth looked up, her eyes narrowing at Richard's tone. "What do you mean?" Richard ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, choosing his words carefully. "We're not equipped to handle a child with special needs. Our lives, our careers, it would be unfair to him." "Richard!" Elizabeth gasped, clutching the baby closer. "He's our son." I know," Richard placated, his businessman's charm kicking in. "But think about it. We can find him a loving family, someone better suited to give him the care he needs. We could provide financial support, ensure he has the best life possible." Elizabeth's lower lip trembled as she looked down at her son. She had dreamed of this moment for years, imagining a perfect baby to complete their perfect life. But the tiny being in her arms, with his button nose and wispy hair, was far from what she had pictured. Maybe you're right," she said softly, her maternal instincts warring with the fear of the unknown. "But how? We can't just give him away." Richard's mind was already working overtime. Leave it to me. I'll make some calls, find the best solution for everyone involved. As Richard stepped out of the room to make those calls, neither he nor Elizabeth noticed the young nurse standing just outside the door, her eyes wide with disbelief at what she had overheard. Maria Gonzalez had been working at St. Mary's for only a few months, but she had never encountered a situation like this. As she watched Richard Blackwell stride purposefully down the hallway, she felt a mix of anger and heartbreak for the innocent child whose fate was being decided so coldly. Back in the room, Elizabeth cradled her son, tears streaming down her face. She hummed a lullaby, her voice breaking on every other note. The baby, oblivious to the turmoil surrounding his birth, yawned and snuggled closer to his mother's warmth. Outside, the Boston skyline stretched towards a cloudy sky, the city unaware of the drama unfolding within the hospital walls. As the day wore on, lives would intertwine in unexpected ways, setting the stage for a journey of love, acceptance, and redemption that would span decades. Little did anyone know that the tiny baby boy, already unwanted by those who should have loved him most, would one day touch the hearts of many and prove that true worth isn't measured by chromosomes or societal expectations, but by the capacity to love and the power to inspire. The early morning sun peeked through the mist that clung to the expansive grounds of the Blackwell estate. In the carefully manicured gardens, a solitary figure moved among the roses, his weathered hands tending to the delicate blooms with practiced care. This was Javier Mendoza, the estate's head gardener for over 2 decades. At 55, Javier's salt and pepper hair and sun-weathered face told the story of a life spent nurturing beauty from the earth. But behind his kind eyes lay a deep sadness. He and his wife, Elena, had tried for years to have a child of their own, but fate had other plans. As Javier worked, he heard the crunch of gravel under tires. He looked up to see Mr. Blackwell's sleek black Mercedes pulling into the driveway. It was unusual for the businessman to return home so early, especially since Mrs. Blackwell had just given birth the day before. Curiosity piqued, Javier made his way towards the main house, pruning shears still in hand. As he approached, he saw Mr. Blackwell step out of the car, his face a mask of determination. But it was what, or rather, who, emerged next that made Javier's heart skip a beat. A young woman in nurse's scrubs carefully lifted a baby carrier from the back seat. The infant inside was tiny, wrapped in a soft blue blanket. "Mr. Blackwell?" Javier called out, unable to contain his surprise. "Is everything all right? We weren't expecting you back so soon." Richard Blackwell turned, his eyes landing on the gardener. For a moment, something like relief flashed across his face. "Ah, Javier. Just the man I wanted to see." Confused, Javier approached as Richard beckoned him closer. The nurse stood awkwardly by the car, cradling the baby carrier. "Javier," Richard began, his voice low and urgent, "I find myself in a delicate situation. One that requires the utmost discretion." The gardener's brow furrowed. "Of course, Mr. Blackwell. How can I help?" Richard glanced at the baby, then back to Javier. "What I'm about to ask of you is unconventional. But I believe you're the right person for this." Javier's eyes widened as Richard explained the situation, the baby's condition, the family's concerns, the need for a loving home. With each word, Javier felt a mix of emotions churning inside him, shock at the Blackwells' decision, anger at their callousness, and an overwhelming sense of protectiveness for the innocent child. "Mr. Blackwell," Javier said, his voice trembling slightly, Are you asking me to take your son?" Richard nodded, relief evident in his eyes. "You and Elena have always wanted a child. This boy needs a loving home, people who can give him the attention and care he requires. I'll ensure you're well compensated, of course." Javier's mind reeled. This was not how he had imagined fatherhood, but as he looked at the sleeping infant, he felt a surge of love he couldn't explain. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the baby. The nurse, who had been watching the exchange with a mix of concern and hope, carefully handed the carrier to Javier. As he peered down at the tiny face, peaceful in sleep, Javier knew in his heart that he could never turn this child away. "I'll need to speak with Elena," Javier said softly, unable to take his eyes off the baby. "But yes, Mr. Blackwell. We'll take him." Relief washed over Richard's face. Excellent. I'll have my lawyers draw up the paperwork immediately. Remember, Javier, discretion is key. As far as anyone needs to know, this child is yours. As Richard turned to leave, the nurse stepped forward, her face etched with concern. Mr. Mendoza, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, my name is Maria. I was there when he was born. I couldn't stand by and let this happen without doing something. She pressed a piece of paper into his hand. This is my number. If you ever need anything, any advice or help with the baby, please call me. Javier nodded gratefully, pocketing the number. As Richard and Maria drove away, leaving him standing in the driveway with the baby, Javier felt as though his whole world had shifted on its axis. With trembling hands, he carried the precious bundle towards the small cottage he shared with Elena at the edge of the Blackwell property. His mind raced with questions and concerns, but his heart was sure. This child needed them, and they needed him. Elena was tending to her small vegetable garden when Javier approached. She looked up, her smile of greeting freezing as she saw what her husband carried. Javier, she asked, rising slowly, her eyes fixed on the baby carrier. What's going on? As Javier recounted the morning's events, Elena's expressions ranged from shock to outrage to tender concern. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment, her gaze locked on the sleeping infant. They just gave him away, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Because he's different? Javier nodded solemnly. They're afraid, Elena. Afraid of what people will think, of how their lives will change. Elena's face hardened with resolve. Well, their loss is our gain. May I hold him? As Javier carefully transferred the baby into Elena's arms, the infant stirred, his eyes fluttering open. They were a deep, soulful brown, and as he gazed up at Elena, a tiny smile curved his lips. Elena gasped softly, tears springing to her eyes. Oh, Javier, she breathed, he's perfect. In that moment, as the morning sun bathed them in its warm glow, Javier knew that their lives would never be the same. This child, unwanted by his birth parents, had found his way into their hearts, filling a void they had carried for so long. What shall we name him? Javier asked, wrapping an arm around his wife's shoulders. Elena considered for a moment, then smiled. How about Mateo? It means, gift from God. Javier nodded, his heart swelling with love for both his wife and their new son. Mateo Mendoza, he said softly. Welcome to our family, little one. As they stood there, a new family formed in the most unexpected of circumstances. None of them could have imagined the journey that lay ahead. A journey that would be filled with challenges and triumphs, heartache and joy, and ultimately, the transformative power of unconditional love. In the Blackwell mansion, a nursery stood empty, its carefully chosen decorations and expensive toys awaiting a child who would never arrive. But in the modest gardener's cottage, a home was made whole, ready to nurture a precious life and witness the unfolding of an extraordinary destiny. The years passed like pages turning in a well-loved book, each one filled with new adventures and challenges for the Mendoza family. Mateo grew from a curious toddler into a vibrant young boy, his infectious laughter and boundless enthusiasm lighting up their modest home. On a warm September morning, as golden leaves danced in the breeze, Javier and Elena stood hand in hand at the gate of Oakwood Elementary School. Between them, 6-year-old Mateo fidgeted with the straps of his oversized backpack, his eyes wide with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Remember, Mijo, Elena said, kneeling to straighten Mateo's collar, you are smart, you are kind, and you are loved. You can do anything you set your mind to. Mateo nodded, his cherubic face serious. I know, Mama. I'll make you proud. Javier ruffled his son's hair affectionately. You already do, every single day. As they watched Mateo walk through the school gates, his steps a little unsteady but determined, Javier squeezed Elena's hand. They had prepared for this day, working tirelessly with therapists and educators to ensure Mateo would have the support he needed. But still, letting him go felt like releasing a piece of their hearts into the world. The first few weeks of school were a whirlwind of adjustment. Mateo came home each day bursting with stories about his teacher, Ms. Thompson, and the new friends he was making. But as the novelty wore off, challenges began to emerge. One crisp October afternoon, Matteo trudged out of school, his usual bounce missing from his step. Elena, waiting at the gate, immediately sensed something was wrong. "What's the matter, sweetheart?" she asked, drawing him into a hug. Matteo buried his face in her coat. "Some big kids were laughing at me," he mumbled. "They said I talk funny and I'm too slow." Elena's heart clenched. She and Javier had known this day would come, but it didn't make it any easier. "Oh, Matteo," she sighed, lifting his chin gently. "Those kids just don't understand how special you are. Your differences are what make you unique and wonderful." But Matteo's lower lip trembled. "I don't want to be different, Mama. I want to be like everyone else." That evening, after Matteo had gone to bed, Javier and Elena sat at their kitchen table, cups of tea growing cold as they discussed their son's struggle. "Maybe we should consider a special needs school," Elena suggested, her voice heavy with worry. "Somewhere he won't feel so out of place." Javier shook his head. "No, mi amor. Matteo needs to learn to navigate the world as it is. We can't shield him forever." He paused, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "But perhaps we can give him something to help build his confidence." The next day, Javier came home from the Blackwell estate with an old easel and a set of paints tucked under his arm. Mr. Blackwell was clearing out some of his wife's old art supplies, he explained to Elena. "I thought Matteo might like to try painting." At first, Matteo approached the easel with hesitation. His fine motor skills, while improving, still made some tasks challenging. But as soon as the brush touched the canvas, something magical happened. Matteo's face lit up with concentration, his tongue poking out slightly as he worked. Over the next few weeks, the Mendoza's small living room transformed into an impromptu art studio. Canvases covered in bright, bold strokes leaned against every available surface. Matteo's paintings were abstract, filled with swirling colors and shapes that seemed to pulse with emotion. "Look, Papa!" Matteo exclaimed one evening, proudly holding up his latest creation. "It's how I feel when I'm happy." Javier studied the canvas, a riot of yellows and oranges that seemed to radiate joy. "It's beautiful, Mijo," he said, his voice thick with pride. "You have a real gift." As Matteo's confidence in his art grew, so did his resilience at school. The teasing didn't stop entirely, but Matteo found strength in his newfound passion. When classmates mocked his speech, he invited them to see his paintings. Many were surprised to discover the quiet boy with Down syndrome could create such vibrant art. Ms. Thompson, recognizing Matteo's talent, encouraged him to share his art with the class. Soon, Matteo's paintings adorned the classroom walls, a rainbow of colors brightening the space. One day, as Javier picked Matteo up from school, Ms. Thompson pulled him aside. "Mr. Mendoza," she said, her eyes shining, "I wanted to let you know about an upcoming district-wide art contest for elementary students. I really think Matteo should enter." Javier's heart swelled with pride, but he hesitated. "Are you sure? The competition might be tough." Ms. Thompson smiled reassuringly. "Matteo's art speaks for itself, Mr. Mendoza. It's not about his condition, it's about his incredible talent." That evening, as Matteo worked on a new painting, his small face scrunched in concentration, Javier and Elena watched from the doorway, their hearts full. "You know," Elena whispered, "I used to worry about what Matteo's future would look like. But now..." She gestured to their son, lost in his colorful world. "Now I see nothing but possibility." Javier nodded, wrapping an arm around his wife. "He's teaching us, Elena. Every day, he's showing us that limitations are often just in our minds." As the weeks passed, Matteo threw himself into preparing for the art contest. He experimented with new techniques, blending colors in ways that seemed to defy the laws of nature. His paintings became more complex, telling stories without words. The day of the contest arrived, crisp and bright. The school gymnasium was transformed into a gallery, filled with artwork from students across the district. Matteo's painting, a stunning depiction of a sunrise over a field of flowers, each petal seeming to reach for the light, stood out among the rest. As judges made their way around the room, Matteo stood proudly beside his creation, answering questions with growing confidence. Javier and Elena watched from a distance, their hearts racing with nervous excitement. When the winners were announced, the gymnasium fell silent. First place in the elementary division, the head judge proclaimed, goes to Matteo Mendoza, for his piece, Reaching for the Sun. The room erupted in applause. Matteo's classmates cheered, Ms. Thompson wiped away a tear, and Javier and Elena embraced, overcome with emotion. As Matteo accepted his ribbon, his face beaming with joy, he looked out at the crowd and spotted his parents. In that moment, surrounded by admiration and love, Matteo stood tall, no longer burdened by the weight of being different. He was simply Matteo, artist, dreamer, and shining example of what was possible when talent was nurtured and differences were celebrated. As they left the gymnasium that day, Matteo's ribbon clutched tightly in his hand, the Mendoza family knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but with love, determination, and the transformative power of art, Matteo was ready to paint his own unique path through life. The years rolled by like a river, carving new paths and deepening old channels. Matteo Mendoza, once a shy boy with a paintbrush, had blossomed into a talented young man of 18. His gift for art had only grown stronger with time, his canvases now sought after by local galleries and art enthusiasts alike. On a warm June morning, Matteo stood in front of his easel in the backyard of the Mendoza cottage, his brow furrowed in concentration. The canvas before him was alive with color, bold streaks of red and orange intertwined with softer hues of blue and purple, creating a harmonious chaos that seemed to pulse with energy. Matteo! Elena called from the kitchen window. Don't forget, we're meeting with Mr. Thornton at the community center in an hour. Matteo glanced up, a streak of paint smudged across his cheek. I remember, Mama. Just finishing up here. As he put the final touches on his painting, Matteo couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement in his stomach. Today's meeting could change everything, not just for him, but for so many others like him. An hour later, the Mendoza family sat in the office of Robert Thornton, director of the Oakwood Community Center. Mr. Thornton, a jovial man with salt and pepper hair, leaned forward in his chair, his eyes twinkling with interest. So, Matteo, he said, tell me more about this idea of yours. Matteo took a deep breath, feeling the reassuring presence of his parents on either side of him. Well, sir, he began, his words careful but filled with passion, I want to start an art program for kids with special needs. A place where they can express themselves freely, without judgment. Mr. Thornton nodded encouragingly. Go on. I know firsthand how art can change lives, Matteo continued, gaining confidence. It gave me a voice when I struggled to find my words. It helped me connect with others when I felt different. I want to give that same opportunity to other kids who might be feeling lost or misunderstood. Javier placed a hand on his son's shoulder, swelling with pride. Matteo's been planning this for months, he added. He's already got a curriculum outlined and a list of potential volunteers. Mr. Thornton leaned back in his chair, a smile spreading across his face. I have to say, I'm impressed. We've been looking for more inclusive programs, and this could be exactly what we need. As they discussed logistics, space requirements, funding, scheduling, Matteo felt a growing sense of purpose. This was more than just an art class, it was a chance to create a community, to show the world that different abilities didn't mean limited potential. Over the next few weeks, Matteo threw himself into bringing his vision to life. He worked tirelessly, coordinating with Mr. Thornton, reaching out to local schools and support groups, and preparing art supplies. His own artwork took a backseat as he poured his heart and soul into this new project. Finally, on a sunny Saturday morning in August, the doors of the Oakwood Community Center opened for the first session of Art Without Limits. Matteo stood at the front of the room, his heart racing as he watched children and their parents file in. There was Tommy, a boy with autism who rarely made eye contact but lit up at the sight of the colorful paints. Sarah, a girl with cerebral palsy, her smile bright as her mother helped her into a chair. And Lucas, a teenager with Down syndrome like Matteo, his excitement palpable as he examined the brushes laid out before him. Welcome, everyone, Matteo began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Today, we're going to create something beautiful together. Remember, there are no mistakes in art, only happy accidents." As the class progressed, the room came alive with creativity and laughter. Children who often struggled to express themselves found freedom in the strokes of their brushes. Parents watched in awe as their kids revealed hidden talents and unbridled joy. Matteo moved from table to table, offering encouragement and guidance. He knelt beside Tommy, gently showing him how to mix colors. He helped Sarah attach a brush to a head pointer, allowing her to paint with her movements. With each interaction, Matteo saw a little bit of himself, the struggles, the triumphs, the pure joy of creation. By the end of the session, the walls were adorned with a rainbow of artwork, each piece as unique as the child who created it. Parents hugged Matteo, tears in their eyes, thanking him for giving their children this opportunity. As the last family left, Javier and Elena approached their son, who stood admiring the wall of paintings. "You did it, Mijo," Elena said softly, wrapping an arm around Matteo's waist. "Look at what you've created." Matteo leaned into his mother's embrace, his eyes shining. "No, Mama. Look at what we've all created together." Javier squeezed his son's shoulder. "You've given these kids more than just an art class, Matteo. You've given them a place where they belong." As they cleaned up the art supplies, Matteo's mind was already racing with plans for future classes. He envisioned exhibitions showcasing the children's work, partnerships with local schools, maybe even expanding to other community centers. But more than that, he saw a future where differences were celebrated, where every child had the chance to shine in their own unique way. It was a future he was determined to help create, one brushstroke at a time. That night, as Matteo lay in bed, his hands still flecked with paint, he felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything he'd experienced before. He had found his calling, not just as an artist, but as a mentor, an advocate, a beacon of hope for those who felt different. In the quiet of his room, surrounded by his own paintings and sketches for future projects, Matteo made a silent promise to himself and to all the children he hoped to reach: this was just the beginning. The canvas of possibility stretched out before him, vast and inviting, ready to be filled with the vibrant colors of acceptance, understanding, and boundless potential. As he drifted off to sleep, Matteo's dreams were filled with images of a world where every child, regardless of their abilities, could pick up a brush and paint their own masterpiece. It was a beautiful vision, and one he was determined to make a reality. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of possibility as Matteo Mendoza, now 25, stood before his latest masterpiece. The painting, a swirling tapestry of vibrant colors and bold strokes, seemed to pulse with life. It was the centerpiece of his first solo exhibition at the prestigious Hartley Gallery in downtown Boston. "It's breathtaking, Matteo," whispered Elena, her eyes glistening with pride as she gazed at the canvas. Javier stood beside her, his weathered hand resting gently on Matteo's shoulder. "You've come so far, Mijo," Javier said, his voice thick with emotion. "From that little boy with a paintbrush to this. A true artist." Matteo smiled, his heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you both," he replied, pulling his parents into a tight embrace. As they separated, Matteo's attention was caught by a commotion near the gallery entrance. A sleek, silver-haired couple had just arrived, their designer clothes and imperious manner causing a stir among the other guests. "Who are they?" Matteo asked, curiosity piqued. The gallery owner, Miss Hartley, quickly approached. "Matteo, darling, you'll never believe who's here," she gushed. "It's Richard and Elizabeth Blackwell. They rarely attend these events, but they insisted on coming when they heard about your exhibition." Matteo's brow furrowed. The Blackwell name was familiar, they owned the estate where his father had worked for decades. But there was something else, a nagging feeling he couldn't quite place. As the Blackwells made their way through the gallery, Matteo noticed Elizabeth's gaze lingering on his paintings, her expression a mix of awe and something deeper, almost painful. Richard, on the other hand, seemed distracted, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Finally, they reached Matteo and his parents. Ms. Hartley made the introductions, her voice tinged with excitement. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell, this is our featured artist, Matteo Mendoza, and his parents, Javier and Elena. Elizabeth's eyes widened as she looked at Mateo, her hand trembling slightly as she extended it. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mateo. Your work is extraordinary. Richard nodded stiffly, his gaze avoiding Mateo's. Indeed. Quite impressive. As they exchanged pleasantries, Mateo couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The way Elizabeth kept staring at him, the tension radiating from Richard, the subtle shift in his parents' demeanor, it all added up to a mystery he couldn't quite unravel. The evening wore on, a blur of congratulations and discussions about art. But even as Mateo engaged with other guests, he found his attention continually drawn to the Blackwells. Elizabeth seemed unable to tear herself away from his paintings, while Richard hovered nearby, his discomfort palpable. As the crowd began to thin, Mateo found himself alone with Elizabeth in front of his centerpiece. She stood silently, her eyes tracing every brushstroke. "Mrs. Blackwell?" Mateo ventured. "Is everything all right?" Elizabeth turned to him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Mateo, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you years ago." Before she could continue, Richard appeared at her side, his face a mask of barely contained panic. "Elizabeth, don't." We agreed. But Elizabeth shook her head, a newfound determination in her eyes. "No, Richard. It's time. He deserves to know." Mateo looked between them, confusion and a growing sense of dread settling in his stomach. "Know what? What's going on?" At that moment, Javier and Elena approached, sensing the tension. "Is everything okay here?" Javier asked, his voice low and protective. Elizabeth took a deep breath, her gaze locked on Mateo. "The truth is, Mateo, we're your biological parents." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Mateo stumbled back, steadied by Elena's quick grasp. "What?" he gasped, his mind reeling. "It's true," Richard interjected, his voice strained. We made a terrible mistake when you were born. We were young, foolish, and scared of what having a child with Down syndrome would mean for our lives and our reputation." Javier stepped forward, his face a storm of emotions. You're the ones who left him with us. Who abandoned your own child." Elizabeth nodded, tears now flowing freely. "We thought we were doing what was best. We were wrong, so terribly wrong. Seeing you now, Mateo, seeing the incredible person you've become. I've never regretted anything more in my life." Mateo felt as if he were underwater, the voices around him muffled and distant. His entire world had just been turned upside down. The parents he'd known and loved all his life weren't his biological family. The couple standing before him, virtual strangers, were the ones who had given him life, and then given him away. I need some air," Mateo muttered, pushing past the group and heading for the gallery exit. Outside, the cool night air did little to clear his head. Mateo leaned against the building, his breath coming in short gasps. How could this be true? How could the life he'd known be built on such a monumental secret? He felt a gentle hand on his arm and turned to see Elena, her face etched with concern. "Mateo, mi amor, talk to me. Did you know?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did you and Papa know all along?" Elena nodded slowly, her eyes filled with sorrow and love. "We did. But Mateo, you must understand, from the moment we held you, you were ours. In every way that matters, you are our son." Javier joined them, wrapping an arm around Mateo's shoulders. "We wanted to tell you when you were older, but as time passed, it seemed less important. You were our boy, our Mateo. Nothing else mattered." Mateo closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the flood of emotions. Anger at the lie, confusion about his identity, gratitude for the love he'd always known, it all swirled together in a dizzying mix. Back inside the gallery, Richard and Elizabeth waited anxiously. When Mateo finally returned, his face was a mask of carefully controlled emotion. I need time," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "This is a lot to process. I can't just accept this and move on." Elizabeth nodded, hope and fear warring in her eyes. "Of course. We understand." We'll give you all the time you need. Just, please, don't shut us out completely. We'd like a chance to make amends, to get to know you." As the Blackwells prepared to leave, Richard hesitated, then spoke. "Mateo, I know we don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want you to know, seeing the man you've become, the artist you are. I've never been more wrong about anything in my life. And I've never been more proud." With that, they were gone, leaving Mateo standing between the two sets of parents, the ones who had given him life, and the ones who had given him love. As he looked at Javier and Elena, their faces etched with worry and unconditional affection, Mateo felt a surge of certainty. "You're my parents," he said firmly, pulling them into a tight embrace. "No matter what, that will never change." As they held each other, surrounded by Mateo's art, vibrant testaments to the power of love, acceptance, and perseverance, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The canvas of Mateo's life had just been expanded, offering new colors and textures to explore. And though the path forward was uncertain, one thing was clear: the masterpiece of his life was far from finished. The weeks following the gallery opening passed in a blur for Mateo. His exhibition had been a resounding success, with critics praising his unique vision and emotional depth. But the triumph of his artistic achievement was overshadowed by the revelation that had turned his world upside down. Mateo found solace in his art, spending long hours in his studio, pouring his conflicted emotions onto canvas. His new works were darker, more turbulent than before, reflecting the storm of feelings within him. One crisp morning, as autumn leaves danced outside his window, Mateo stood before his latest piece. The painting was a chaotic swirl of deep blues and angry reds, with a fragile golden thread weaving through the tumult. He stepped back, studying it with a critical eye. "You're brooding again," came Elena's gentle voice from the doorway. Mateo turned, offering a small smile. "Just thinking, Mama." Elena crossed the room, wrapping an arm around her son's waist. "About the Blackwells?" Mateo nodded, his gaze returning to the canvas. "I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to know them, to understand, but another part is so angry. How could they just give me away?" "Oh, mi amor," Elena sighed, "life is rarely simple. People make mistakes, even terrible ones. But sometimes, those mistakes can lead to beautiful things." She squeezed him gently. "Like you coming into our lives." Mateo leaned into his mother's embrace, drawing strength from her unwavering love. "I know. And you and Papa will always be my real parents. It's just, complicated. Life often is," Elena agreed. "But remember, Mateo, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing. It means choosing to let go of anger and move forward." As Elena's words sank in, Mateo felt a spark of inspiration. He turned back to his easel, grabbing a fresh brush. "I think I know what I need to do," he said softly. Over the next few days, Mateo worked tirelessly on a new series of paintings. Each canvas told a part of his story, from the shadowy beginnings of his birth and adoption to the vibrant joy of his childhood with the Mendozas, the discovery of his artistic talent, and finally, the turbulent revelation of his true parentage. When the series was complete, Mateo stood back, surveying his work. The final painting showed two sets of hands, one weathered and strong, the other refined and hesitant, reaching towards each other across a divide, with a brilliant burst of color where they almost touched. Taking a deep breath, Mateo picked up his phone and dialed the number Elizabeth Blackwell had given him weeks ago. "Hello," came Elizabeth's hesitant voice. "Mrs. Blackwell. It's Mateo. I think I'm ready to talk." 2 days later, Mateo found himself sitting in the opulent living room of the Blackwell mansion. Richard and Elizabeth perched nervously on the edge of their seats, while Javier and Elena sat protectively on either side of Mateo. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken words and years of regret. Finally, Mateo spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice steady. "What you did, it hurt. It still hurts. But I realize now that if things had been different, I wouldn't be who I am today. I wouldn't have had the amazing parents who raised me, or discovered my passion for art." Elizabeth nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Richard stared at his hands, unable to meet Mateo's gaze. I'm not ready to forgive you, Matteo continued. Not yet. But I'm willing to try and understand. To see if there's a way forward for all of us. Richard looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. We don't deserve your kindness, Matteo. But we're grateful for this chance. Matteo reached into his bag, pulling out a small canvas. I made this for you, he said, handing it to Elizabeth. It's how I see our situation. Elizabeth gasped softly as she took in the image, two sets of hands reaching across a divide. It's beautiful, she whispered. The space between the hands, Matteo explained, that's where we are now. There's still a gap, but maybe we can work on closing it. Slowly. As the afternoon wore on, the conversation flowed more easily. Matteo shared stories of his childhood, his art, his dreams for the future. The Blackwells listened intently, asking questions and offering tentative insights into their own lives. When it was time to leave, Elizabeth hesitated, then asked, Matteo, would you consider displaying your art here? We have a beautiful sunroom that would make a wonderful gallery space. Matteo glanced at Javier and Elena, who nodded encouragingly. I'd like that, he said softly. It could be a new beginning for all of us. In the weeks that followed, Matteo worked closely with the Blackwells to transform their sunroom into a stunning gallery. His paintings, chronicling his journey from abandoned infant to celebrated artist, adorned the walls. The centerpiece was the painting of the reaching hands, symbolizing the bridge they were all trying to build. On the day of the gallery's unveiling, Matteo stood proudly between his two sets of parents. As guests marveled at his work, he felt a sense of peace settling over him. The anger and confusion that had plagued him were giving way to something new, understanding, acceptance, and the possibility of healing. Later that evening, as the last guests departed, Matteo found himself alone with Richard in front of the reaching hands painting. You know, Richard said quietly, when you were born, I was terrified. I thought having a child with Down syndrome would be the end of everything I'd worked for. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. I've never been so wrong in my life. Watching you grow, seeing your talent and your heart, you've accomplished more than I ever dreamed possible. Matteo studied the older man's face, seeing the genuine remorse and admiration there. Thank you, he said simply. That means a lot. As they stood there, contemplating the painting and the journey it represented, Matteo realized that his life had become a masterpiece far more complex and beautiful than any canvas could capture. It was a tapestry woven from love, loss, discovery, and the courage to bridge seemingly insurmountable gaps. The path ahead was still uncertain, but Matteo faced it with a heart full of hope and a palette rich with possibility. He had two families now, one that had loved him from the start, and one that was learning to love him anew. And in the space between, he found the inspiration for his greatest works yet to come. The gentle hum of excitement filled the air as Matteo Mendoza, now 30 years old, stood before the doors of the newly renovated Blackwell Inclusive Arts Center. The building, once a cold and imposing structure on the edge of the Blackwell estate, had been transformed into a vibrant haven for artists of all abilities. Matteo's heart raced as he surveyed the crowd gathered for the grand opening. There were faces he knew well, his parents, Javier and Elena, beaming with pride, Richard and Elizabeth Blackwell, their eyes shining with a mixture of joy and lingering remorse, and dozens of his students from the community art program he'd started years ago. Are you ready? Elizabeth asked softly, placing a hand on Matteo's shoulder. Matteo nodded, taking a deep breath. More than ready, he replied, his voice steady with determination. As the ribbon was cut and the doors swung open, a wave of awe swept through the crowd. The entrance hall was a kaleidoscope of color, with Matteo's own works displayed alongside pieces created by his students. Each painting told a story of triumph over adversity, of beauty found in unexpected places. Guiding the first group of visitors through the center, Matteo couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. This place was the culmination of a dream he'd harbored since those first art classes he'd taught at the community center, a space where talent could flourish regardless of physical or mental challenges. And here, Matteo said, leading the group into a large, sun-filled studio, is where the magic happens. We've designed adaptive tools and techniques to ensure that everyone can express themselves through art, no matter their abilities. He demonstrated a few of the innovations: easels that could be adjusted for wheelchair users, brushes modified for those with limited motor control, and touch-sensitive tablets for digital art creation. As the tour continued, Matteo caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. It was Tommy, now a teenager, who had been one of his first students years ago. Once a boy who struggled to make eye contact, Tommy now stood tall, proudly showing off his own artwork to an impressed group of onlookers. "Matteo!" Tommy called out, his face lighting up. "Can I show you my new piece?" Matteo grinned, excusing himself from the tour group. "Of course, Tommy. Lead the way." As Tommy excitedly explained his latest creation, a stunning digital artwork that seemed to pulse with energy, Matteo felt a lump form in his throat. This was why he had worked so hard, why he had pushed through every obstacle. To see the joy and confidence in Tommy's eyes, to witness the transformative power of art, it made every struggle worthwhile. Later that afternoon, as the opening celebrations were winding down, Matteo found a quiet moment with his parents and the Blackwells. They stood together in front of a wall dedicated to the center's origin story, which included photos of Matteo as a baby, his childhood artwork, and the pivotal painting of reaching hands that had marked the beginning of his reconciliation with his birth parents. "I never imagined this day would come," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. When we made that terrible mistake all those years ago, I thought we were closing a door. But look at what you've opened, Matteo. Look at the lives you're changing." Javier squeezed Matteo's shoulder. "We always knew you were destined for great things, Mijo. From the moment we held you, we saw a spark in your eyes." Elena nodded, wiping away a tear. "You've taken every challenge life has thrown at you and turned it into something beautiful. We couldn't be more proud." Matteo looked at the four people surrounding him, the parents who had raised him with unwavering love, and the birth parents who had found the courage to make amends. He felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unique journey that had brought them all to this moment. "I couldn't have done any of this without all of you," Matteo said softly. "Each of you has played a part in shaping who I am and what I've been able to achieve." Elizabeth reached out, taking Matteo's hand in hers. "And we are so grateful to be a part of your life, Matteo. The world is a better place because of you." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the center's windows, Matteo excused himself for a moment. He made his way to a small, private studio tucked away at the back of the building. This was his personal space, where he could retreat to paint and reflect. Inside, he stood before a blank canvas, larger than any he had worked on before. This piece would be special, a celebration of the journey that had led to this day, and a vision of the future he hoped to create. As Matteo picked up his brush, he felt a familiar surge of inspiration. The canvas before him was more than just a surface for paint, it was a metaphor for life itself. Blank and full of possibility, waiting to be filled with the vibrant colors of experience, love, and purpose. With broad, confident strokes, Matteo began to paint. He poured onto the canvas all the emotions of the past years, the joy of creation, the pain of discovery, the warmth of family both old and new, and the hope that burned bright for the future. Hours passed, and as the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Matteo stepped back from his completed work. The painting was a masterpiece of color and emotion, depicting a diverse group of people reaching towards a brilliant sun. In the foreground, two sets of hands, one weathered, one refined, cradled a paintbrush, symbolizing the united support that had made his dreams possible. Matteo smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over him. He had faced challenges that once seemed insurmountable, bridged gaps that appeared uncrossable, and in doing so, had created something truly extraordinary. As he cleaned his brushes and prepared to rejoin the world outside his studio, Matteo knew that this was just the beginning. The Blackwell Inclusive Arts Center was more than just a building or a program, it was a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and the indomitable human spirit. With his brush, Matteo had not only painted his own story but had also begun to repaint the world around him, one stroke at a time. And as he looked towards the future, he saw an endless canvas of possibility, waiting to be filled with the vibrant colors of hope, inclusion, and boundless creativity. 5 years had passed since the opening of the Blackwell Inclusive Arts Center, and Mateo Mendoza, now 35, stood at the podium of a grand auditorium in New York City. The audience before him was a sea of eager faces, artists, educators, philanthropists, and advocates for people with disabilities. Art, Mateo began, his voice clear and confident, is not just about creating beauty. It's about breaking barriers, challenging perceptions, and giving voice to those who have been silenced. As he spoke, sharing the story of his journey and the success of the Arts Center, Mateo couldn't help but reflect on the twists and turns that had brought him to this moment. In the front row, he saw the proud faces of his parents, Javier and Elena, their eyes glistening with tears of joy. Beside them sat Richard and Elizabeth Blackwell, who had become steadfast supporters of Mateo's vision, using their influence and resources to spread the message of inclusive arts education. Our center has shown that when we embrace diversity and provide opportunities, incredible things happen, Mateo continued. We've seen nonverbal children find their voice through painting, adults with physical disabilities create stunning digital art, and countless lives transformed by the power of creativity. As he concluded his speech to thunderous applause, Mateo felt a sense of fulfillment wash over him. The boy who had once been rejected for being different had grown into a man who celebrated differences and used them to create something beautiful. Later that evening, as Mateo shared a quiet dinner with both sets of his parents, he realized that his life had become its own kind of masterpiece. It was a complex, layered creation, filled with light and shadow, joy and pain, all blending together to form something uniquely beautiful. You know, Richard said, raising his glass in a toast, I used to think success was measured by wealth and status. But you've shown me, shown all of us, that true success is measured by the lives you touch and the positive change you create in the world. Javier nodded in agreement. We always knew you were destined for greatness, Mijo. But you've exceeded even our wildest dreams. As the conversation flowed, filled with laughter and shared memories, Mateo felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had two families now, bound together not by blood, but by love, forgiveness, and a shared commitment to making the world a little more colorful and inclusive. The next morning, before heading to the airport, Mateo made one last stop at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. As he wandered through the galleries, he came across a painting that stopped him in his tracks. It was one of his own works, recently acquired by the museum, a vibrant, emotionally charged piece that told the story of his journey. Standing before it, Mateo realized that his life's work was far from over. There were still so many barriers to break, so many minds to open, and so many hearts to touch. But he was ready for the challenge, armed with his brushes, his determination, and the unwavering support of his loved ones. As he turned to leave, Mateo caught his reflection in the glass protecting his painting. He saw not just himself, but the legacy of all those who had believed in him, his birth parents who had found the courage to make amends, his adoptive parents who had loved him unconditionally, and every student whose life had been changed by art. With a smile, Mateo headed towards the exit, ready to face whatever new adventures lay ahead. He knew that no matter what challenges he might encounter, he had the power to transform them into something beautiful, one brushstroke at a time.